Samsung Electronics. It's a South Korean multinational electronics company that is the flagship subsidiary of Samsung Group. It has a market cap of $345 billion, a PE ratio of 11.55, and a dividend yield of 1.17%. So interesting, you can see the share price graph there. It's done incredibly well. It does own 25% of the market share, but as we've already discussed, not as profitable by a long stretch as Apple.
Yeah, I mean, they also have quite a big exposure to kind of low margin electronics, so television sets and all the rest of those kinds of things, and they just don't make as much the margin just isn't as big in those businesses.
But for perspective, I was looking at the financials. So 50% of the revenues comes from mobile, but about 30% of profits. The most profitable side of the business is actually their chips business. Yeah. And they actually supply Apple with a lot of their chips, which is ironic.
Yeah, that is ironic, and I think that's probably where their niche really lies. But their handsets have been incredibly popular, even though they're not as profitable. So, I mean, you said earlier they've got a 25% market share. That means 1 in every 4 people who own a smartphone own a Samsung, and I can attest to that. I mean, we're only 2 people in our house, and half of us owns a Samsung. Almost kind of the same type of drivers when it comes to the smartphone business as is the case with Apple, where you have really good apps developed by Google and Android, and then also, of course, services. But in Samsung's case, I don't think that they've been able to make as much of an inroad in services as Apple has.
Yeah, because obviously they don't own the platform, so it's all up to Android to process all of that.
And for Google to benefit.
Yeah, exactly. I feel sorry for Samsung sometimes because they come out with these innovations, you know, waterproof phone, and then the full screen, and then Apple go and do it and charge twice the price, and everyone still loves Apple for it.
Yeah, but no, Apple's phones don't explode in your hand though. I mean, there was that whole Galaxy Note 7 debacle. So, I mean, people are still making jokes about it, and it's bad for PR. And even though the handsets are a little bit better priced than the Apple handsets, people do penalize you for stuff like that. And the popularity, even though it kind of has maintained at that 25% mark, we'll have to see how new adopters of smartphones actually react to the Samsung. And I think a big competitor for them has been Huawei. A lot of people that I know that used to have a Samsung handset have gone into Huawei. It's cheaper, the camera is better, and I think they're eating Samsung's lunch at the moment.
And a lot of the focus for these businesses is China, because still pretty obsessed nation with smartphones. Obviously, we've looked at Tencent a lot, Alibaba. These guys spend a lot of time on their phones. There's about 800 million smartphones in use in China at the moment. So everyone's fighting for market share there, and you feel like Huawei has come in there and taken out Samsung in a big way.
Well, yeah, and ultimately it leads to there's a first mover advantage, and Huawei seems to have that in China. I mean, I don't even think Apple is really serious about like building massive inroads in China, and those guys are committed. If you think you're a cyborg, Chinese consumers are real cyborgs. They do everything on their phone, and they do everything on their apps. So the winner there will probably tend to be the winner going forward.
And very thin margins.
Yes.
Hot or not on Samsung?
It's very difficult because the valuation is very compelling. I mean, on 11.5 times forward PE, combined with the fact that they actually do have an ability to get into any sort of smartphone market by using those chips.
It'll have to be chips and the LED screens.
Yeah, the LED screens. It'll have to be kind of a valuation hot.
Okay, well, we'll go with hot there. I'm going to agree with you as well. I'm not the biggest fan of the phones, but I think the chips and the screens business is pretty solid, and the TVs and so on. So let's go hot with Samsung. Next up.